and welcome to the May edition of Wild, everybody, Women in Learning and Development. Last month we skipped a month, so I'm glad to be back with you, and I am so excited about our guest today. So I invite you to please grab a cup of coffee, a mimosa, considering where you are. I think we have somebody from the UK, a mocktail, water, whatever you'd like, and just kind of join us this morning. Any questions you have, go ahead and put them in the chat. And I do want to tell everybody that this is a no sorry zone. I don't want to hear any sorries for anything unless you've done something really bad we need to feel sorry for. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest, Mikaela Kiner, and she has her own human resources company, Reverb, here in the Seattle area. We're both in the Pacific Northwest. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I am incredibly excited to join you and the group today.
Yes. So I'm wondering if we can just kind of get started. If you could tell us, I'm going to say your story, sort of how you kind of became involved in the human resource profession, and take it from there.
Sure. Well, it's kind of easy to start. I always say I came by this work honestly because both of my parents are plaintiffs' attorneys. They're employment lawyers. Okay. So what that means for anyone who doesn't know is that they're the ones who sue companies when they mistreat people, when there's harassment, discrimination. And they both do that. So I grew up hearing all those stories as a kid at the dinner table and just thinking there's got to be a better way to do this stuff. This seems crazy. So I didn't start my career in HR, but I quickly ended up falling into HR, going back to grad school. Started out in recruiting like a lot of HR folks do, but really since 2000, I've been practicing as an HR professional. And about 15 years of HR in big companies led me to get kind of tired. I have 2 kids and worked a lot when the kids were smaller. Yeah. They're teens now. But eventually it just kind of led me on this path of first getting certified as an executive coach, and then realizing if I stayed in those big corporate head of HR jobs, I was afraid I would never have time to coach and practice what I had come to love. And something I wanted to get good at it. I thought if I'm going to get good at this and do this as a profession one day, I should start now. So that's really what led me to launch my firm just about 3.5 years ago.
So can you just kind of tell me a little bit about Reverb? So I know it used to be Uniquely HR, and you kind of I can't think of the word, realigned to Reverb. Sort of what you kind of specialize in. Sure. And how you've kind of structured your company.
Yeah, we rebranded in January of this year for 2 reasons. One is that term of HR has gotten an increasingly worse reputation. And I was actually at an event of tech professionals and academics. I was at a table, there were no HR people, and we had this opportunity to put out a question to the group. And so my question was, what do you think about when you hear the term HR? And they started with the dungeon, the dentist's office, the torture chamber. And so by the time we were halfway around the table, I said, I'm definitely dropping the HR, because that was what I was contemplating.
Nobody said the principal's office. I always thought I was going to the like I was in school and I was going to the principal's office. People were scared of HR.
Yeah, it was worse, like the torture chamber. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I mean, we like to help with engagement and inclusion and making sure the right people get, bonuses and promotions. Like, we're not about the principal's office, right? So that was part of the reason for the name change. The other piece was that while we do HR consulting, so we'll do HR projects, we work a lot with startups. We'll come in and set up HR for startups. And then if they're growing, we'll run their HR just part-time, a day or 2 a week, until they're big enough to need a full-time HR person. But the other things we do are leadership development and executive coaching. And a lot of people don't associate those with HR. So when we have the name Uniquely HR, they would say, well, that's confusing. You do more than HR. So, well, I think of it as sort of anything that has to do with, growing and developing people. I lump it all together. But what I found was that other people, including our clients, don't. So dropping the HR has actually helped them to clarify that what we do is bigger than just human resources.
Yeah. So you are a very huge force for women. Has that always been something that you've been interested in, or how did that kind of come about? Because I know you have a lot of women who work within your firm, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, my experience, I call it the myth of the meritocracy. I really didn't think it mattered, that I was a woman in a professional setting. I spent 7 years at Microsoft and 6 at Amazon, and I just thought, yeah, I'm going to do my job and hopefully get rewarded and recognized for the work I do. And that was true. I mean, to a large degree, I think it was true. But what I found was as I became more senior, and especially throughout most of my career, I was the only woman sitting with the executive team of my clients, the VP or eventually the CEOs.
Mm-hmm.
And it started to matter. It's my experience started to feel different. And one example, this is like an example, I think, where it all hit home for me. It sort of created this cascading effect. I had joined an organization as the head of HR. It took a couple of weeks for them to announce me internally. They never issued an external press release. And I was like, oh, that's kind of odd, but, maybe that's the way it is. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't feel like greatly included, but then I thought, a lot of times people don't really like HR. So maybe I need to help them understand what I do and what my team does.
Right.
And then within several months, a very junior finance person joined the company. And he was good, and I helped interview him, and he joined. And there was kind of a uniform for the guys. All the guys wore their jeans, all the guys wore their button-up shirts with the sleeves cuffed, and then in the winter they wore fleece. And women don't really have a uniform. So about a week into this junior person's tenure at the company, we're in a room with some executives and the CEO. He walks in, he's in the guy uniform, and the CEO claps him on the back and it's like, hey man, it's so great to see you. And it was this moment, I was like, nobody clapped me on the back. Nobody thought it was great to see me. And I'm supposed to be an executive at this company, right? And it was just this moment of feeling like I'm so different. And I think it's because I'm a woman. I don't really have another good explanation for why I face that treatment. So that was an aha moment. And then what happens, I think, for many women is all these other aha moments from over the course of our career start to stack up, and we're like, oh, that's what was going on. Oh, now I see where, why wasn't I invited to a meeting, or why wasn't I invited when the rest of the leaders, went out for drinks after an offsite. And you start to see that maybe the only common denominator is gender.
Well, and what has happened, I think, in the past is we said, well, that's kind of the way it is.
Yeah.
That's just kind of the way it is. So as women, we'll accept this and we'll just kind of move on.
Yeah, very much. We've been conditioned that not that these things are good, but that they're normal, and that this is what happens in the workplace. And if we speak up, we often put ourselves in peril that we can be labeled as the complainer, the difficult person. We can lose
the troublemaker.
Our job feels at greater risk probably than the job of the person who actually initiated whatever that misbehavior was. So that was a big turning point for me. And then in starting my own firm, I had learned, I sacrificed a lot. I think we all do when we were juggling
Right.
with jobs and kids. And so when I went on my own, I created sort of my own tenets around I'm going to work with and for people I like. I work hard, but I also take my daughter to school, once a week. I'm going to enjoy what I do. I'm going to make sure there's respect and integrity. And that's really how we work. And, it's attracted a lot of women, both to the team and female clients as well. So the team we're a staff of 7 right now. Coincidentally, the staff is all women. We do have an office, but we're also virtual and remote. We all, sort of come and go as it's convenient. And what I found, some of us with kids, that's a big benefit. But then I have a team member, she doesn't have kids, but she's like, hey, I like to sneak out and go to the rock climbing gym at 3 before it gets crazy, and then I can come home and finish up my work. That same person said, hey, I'd really like to spend the winter in Bali. I said, well, why don't you do that? Like, there's no reason not to do that. She writes a lot of contracts. She is okay just talking with clients over calls. So she and her husband went and spent 2 months in Bali, and we all got our jobs done. It wasn't a big deal. And so I really like to promote and encourage the kind of flexibility that I didn't personally have in my career, and a lot of women still don't have.
Well, I'd love to hear from the individuals in the chat, and I'd love to talk a little bit more about that, because even though great strides, I think, have been made in the world of work, we still think of work as work, as something heavy. And what you're talking about is the ideal to many, but that's not many workplaces, unfortunately. And to me, that's amazing. So how do you find that kind of place? I still feel as a woman, I don't get support from women in the workplace, and I still see a lot of that kind of those issues.
Yeah. I hope that's changing too, and we're talking about that. It's not only men who are raised in a sexist society, right? If we were all raised in the same sexist society, and there are things that perpetuate that competition between women, or sometimes I call it hazing. And it's that notion that sometimes there is still only one seat at the table for a woman. And if you create that kind of dynamic, it's only natural that people will compete for it. So a lot of women I work with across different organizations, including my friend Leslie, who runs something called the Female Founders Alliance,
Yes.
Our goal is really helping women understand we're much better off when we work together. It's not that we can't have healthy competition. There are women, we might compete for business, but we're friends. We do it in a healthy way. We compete on something. We might collaborate on something else. There's no backstabbing, and there's no advantage to women competing in that way or putting one another down. And often women aren't even aware of it. There's a study I heard about that really brought this to light for me, where there were both male and female speakers, and they gave reactions of the audience, including eye contact and smiling or nodding in affirmation. And both men and women were more affirmative of the male speakers, and both men and women showed signs that were more critical of the female speakers.
I know, and I've found that a lot of people say, well, a lot of these things don't exist anymore. Things have gotten better. And I do believe that women, and this was something talking about attractiveness, and I do believe that still exists. And I do believe, and I've seen it myself, where women are judging other women on their attractiveness. And I'm going to be very blunt here, and I've probably done it myself, I'll admit it. We see someone who's very attractive. Oh, I bet she's a bitch. I hear that all the time. And in the past, I have done that before I've grown and become more supportive. So,
I think you're really courageous to admit that. And, here's another one that's really common and that I still catch myself doing. We see a beautiful, well put together young woman, and we hear she's an engineer, and we have to pause and then kind of go, oh yeah, like she can be an engineer. It's these stereotypes they're so ingrained, and
yes,
they're unconscious bias. And what I've learned about unconscious bias is you can't prevent the thought from coming to your mind. You're not a bad person because that stereotype emerged, because you can't help that. But what you can do is increase your awareness, and then you increase your intentionality. And the moment that my mind does that, I just say to myself, of course she can be an engineer. That's an old bias. Engineers don't just look like guys in hoodies in their basement, and she's probably a fabulous engineer, right? And so we can just do that quick moment of recognition and self-talk, and we have to forgive ourselves. We can't help the thoughts that emerge, but we can just help what we do with them.
Yeah, and sometimes I question myself and say, but I'm a woman. So if I'm saying this about somebody else, what does that mean I think about myself, because I'm a woman?
Yeah.
So, and then, okay, but yeah, like you said, catching yourself, and I know many of us do it, and I don't know if many of us want to admit it, but I know I've done it.
women are extremely hard on ourselves. There's a large degree of perfectionism, not to mention that we're raised to care for others and very little to care for ourselves. And all of this leads to imposter syndromes, where you see women with huge, accolades, degrees, professional experience, global experience, and they doubt themselves. Recently, Michelle Obama was quoted as saying, she's like, "Oh, I have huge imposter syndrome. I thought I wasn't good enough." And we're all going, Michelle Obama, but we all do it because it's just ingrained, and hopefully that's changing. Um, my daughter, I always talk about my daughter when I talk about women. My daughter's 14, and she's in 8th grade, and right now she's doing her 8th grade project on women's empowerment through rock climbing. And she's interviewing women climbers at her gym, and she asked them 2 questions. She said, does climbing make you feel more empowered as a woman? They all said yes. She said, do you experience sexism in the climbing community as a woman? And they all said yes. And the climbing community is known for wonderful people, inclusion, across gender, across race, across age. And yet, they all experience sexism. And my daughter had told me one day at the gym, we were climbing, and she's pretty strong, and some guy kept walking over and giving her advice. And I love she knew it. She said, "Mom, that guy keeps mansplaining to me. He doesn't think I know." She's like,
That's kind of the new word, mansplaining.
She knew I'm probably better than him. And I was like, yeah, you probably are. You go for it. And you know what? If you want to say something to him nicely, it doesn't have to be confrontational. If you want to be ready to say, thanks, I'm not really looking for advice right now, or thanks, I've climbed this route, a dozen times, like, say it. There's no harm in speaking up for yourself.
Yeah, I love that. And kind of as we're talking, I'm listening to you, and there's something I wanted to add as well, is as women, I would love to see women or as a community, and embrace other women of other cultures. So sometimes that happens is we have, white women, we have Black women, we have the Black culture, which is very different, but we all have one thing in common, and that's that we're all women, but we all have different experiences. And I think that's so important as women that we understand that. We all have different choices and different experiences on so many different levels, religion, child rearing, not wanting children. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, there's a colleague introduced me to a hashtag called "All the Women Are Not White," because often this is one of those unconscious things. And if you are speaking or reading, you might see this: women and people of color, which it loses the intersectionality that there are women of color, right? And we talk and generalize in this way. I have this question. I talked to a number of colleagues about this, a number of women of color, to say, help me understand why this commonality of sisterhood, why haven't we all joined forces? And, what they educated me was that, yes, there's a plight that we share as women. There are greater and different plights for women of color. And so until white women can recognize that, and can recognize that we're not all facing the same challenges, the same injustices across the board, white women also need to listen to and really hear the stories of women of color. If you take something, numbers help people understand things. If you take something like the gender pay gap, if you average that gap, women might make 78 cents on the dollar as a whole. But white women are at the top of that pyramid.
Yes.
And you look at the pay gap for Black women, for Latino women, that gap is bigger, And so again, we have to acknowledge, and when we just use one number to explain the pay gap, that in and of itself is racist. I mean, I learned this on a podcast I listened to, because again, we're burying the information that's more representative of the women of color.
Absolutely. And I want to include in that transgender females, people who identify as women. And so they have a tougher road as well. I don't know if there's any statistics out there on pay, what the pay gap is, but that's something as well that, and I know it is difficult for some people, but that those individuals need to be embraced as well, because they're sort of really on the outside.
Yeah, there's a fabulous short YouTube video that was put out by the women who do a podcast called Battle Tactics for Your Sexist Workplace. And they use Skittles. And one is a white woman, one is a black woman, and they go back and forth. And they're like, oh, I'm sorry, you're a woman. I have to take some Skittles out of your jar. Oh, and you're black, so more Skittles come out of your jar. Oh, and we have children, more Skittles out of the jar. And so they're just layering on each of these, they're penalties, right? For every difference that we have as women, and then you get into color, orientation, et cetera. For each one, when it comes to pay and a lot of other things, it becomes a penalty.
Yeah. And when we talk about these things, and I say that we're fueled by women, but we're for everyone, are wild, is that we have a number of men in this cast, which I love. And so I don't want to be exclusive of men and make it seem like they're the enemy either. So I'm hoping that men aren't getting that feeling. But I do feel too, women need more men as their allies. And that kind of brings me to the Me Too movement, which I've been reading some things that within the Me Too movement, it's kind of, there's some backlash that now men don't want to invite women into those rooms that we haven't previously been in, and that it's caused sometimes some more issues. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you're bringing this up, because some of my biggest advocates and allies are and have been men. Throughout my career, in those corporate jobs, and even today, a lot of the people who really advocate for me and for the work that I do. And yeah, nobody should feel bad about having privilege. Privilege is a fact, right? We were born into a certain circumstance, and race, gender. Obviously, these are things that for the most part we can't control. So we shouldn't feel bad about the privilege, but we just need to recognize what's the power that comes with it, and how can I use that power for good? And our advocates and allies are doing. As far as this, it's been called now the Pence effect, because Vice President Pence has said, I won't go into a closed door meeting with a woman. I won't go out to an event where there's alcohol without my wife, and all these things. And yeah, it risks, excluding women even further from places where we've already been excluded. And unless you treat men the same way, if you also say, I won't go behind closed doors with a man, I won't, go out with men where there are drinks unless my wife is there, it's sexist, and it's an illegal behavior. It's an extremely harmful behavior. And, I like to step back and think about this, which is that men are not fired for complimenting a woman's sweater, right? This is not harassment, and it's just not that confusing. And we talk about confusion as a form of resistance. So men who think, can I meet with a woman now? Can I work with a woman? Of course you can meet women. Of course you can work with women. You can't assault women. You can't harass women. By the way, you never should have been doing those things anyway. And I like to use the standard test of, would you say this in front of your family members? Would you say this in front of your spouse, grandparents, or children? Would you say it in front of your customer? Do you want it repeated on Twitter and Facebook? And if the answer is no, don't do it at work. But it's just, it's not as confusing or gray, I think, as some people are making it out to be.
And the thing is, I shouldn't be shocked, but I think, some of these things, they really don't happen. And I wanted to share that I was at a conference. So it was a tech conference. And I was talking with one of the partners I work with some of the women in the booth. And they were telling me that they were getting hit on by men in this booth. I thought, what? This is a professional conference. I mean, I know I sound very naive, but I couldn't believe it. They said, oh yeah. And I said, well, maybe it was somebody who's from another culture and didn't quite understand. And they said, no, it was a guy from Minnesota. So I guess that really surprised me. And I've heard, we have a Slack channel, and somebody had posted in the Slack channel that a woman that she has been getting messages from men on LinkedIn. I don't know if you've heard that. Where
I got one. I got some. It was I don't know who that person was. Hello, beautiful Mikaela, and I was like, block. I mean, I don't know who you are.
right, and I don't know if it's spam but those things still happen, and a lot of times we just think, oh, that's normal, and ignore it. And I think sometimes men who are allies don't realize that it still happens because we just, like the women in the booth, oh well, they just brushed it off. You know, that happens. So
No, it absolutely happens. I'm you know, as when you started sharing that, it reminded me there's a it's the virtual assistant. You know, it's a bot, and your bot can be named Amy or Andy through this one particular service. And I heard the inventor. I heard him speak 2 years ago at an HR tech event, and one of the things they had done for the female bot Amy, they counted how many times Amy got asked out. So this is, first of all, it's not a human. Now, whether they knew it was a human or not, this is someone who's helping you schedule a business meeting, and then you're taking the time to email them and ask them out. I mean, this is completely inappropriate and offensive. And it was something like 10% of people asked Amy out. And it was just obscene.
yeah, and it made me think. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was saying it happens. It happens, you know, daily. It happens across different industries. And you know, while we think awareness is up, training is up. If you think that these behaviors have been going on for decades, it's sad but understandable that it's going to take some time to reverse those behaviors.
Yeah, and I think too, we have a lot of people who are on the chat and in our community are instructional designers or learning experience designers. So they have that ability when they're designing a learning and they're kind of choosing how they maybe want to use characters or such, they have that ability to really make an impact on how we think differently and culturally. So I wanted to kind of bring that up and kind of bring that around to kind of the learning and development community. That these are things that we can definitely start planting the seeds with. I mean, we're not going to solve it tomorrow, but.
Yeah. And we really, you know, we're not a diversity and equity firm. We're more of an HR consulting firm. But we know that inclusion is important to our clients and to everything we do. And so one thing we did was we actually took some of our workshop content and shared it with our advisor, Cheryl Ingram, who is a DEI expert, and that's the work that she does. And we had her review the material, and we asked her, where is there room to be more inclusive? And she gave us a number of suggestions. It might have been around gendered language, the type of imagery we were using, the examples. And then I learned, I didn't even know this, but I went to an author talk by Ijoma Aluo, who wrote So You Want to Talk About Race.
Oh, okay.
She shared that among writers, especially writers of fiction, if they're describing a culture or characters that are from a different background than their own, they'll hire a reader to do what she called a sensitivity check. So if I was a white author writing about a Black character, I could hire a Black expert author to check my terminology, my assumptions, you know, the context I'm providing. And it made me realize that without knowing it, that was kind of what we did with our own workshop materials. Like, please do a sensitivity check and make sure we're being inclusive, because we could have missed something.
Yeah, I love that. I have never heard of that, but I love that.
I hadn't either.
Yeah, I love that. So what I would like to do, if it's okay with you, is kind of use the rest of our time to talk a little bit about your book.
Thank you.
And so I want to make sure I'm going to have you say the title because I want to make sure we get it right. So can you tell me a little bit about your book and when it's coming out, when we can look forward to it, and talk a little bit about it, what you found out?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much. The book is out in January of 2020, and the title is Female Firebrands: Stories and Techniques to Ignite Change, Take Control, and Succeed in the Workplace. So that gives you an idea right there what this is all about. I have learned so much on this journey, and the basis of the book was that I chose 13 women who I admire for their professional success, their courage, for how they do support and advocate for other women. And the fact that for each one, there's something mission driven about her. You know, it's not just like, I'm going to go do, you know, start some business and make a bunch of money, right? These are very mission driven women.
I love that. Yeah.
It's a diverse group of women. So I was really intentional about including voices of diverse women, which I think I attribute, you know, my learning to that. Because, for instance, Ruchika Tulshyan, she's a pretty well-known author, award-winning journalist. She does diversity and equity work, and she's Singaporean. And when Ruchika shared a story and she said, you know, sometimes I feel like I have to hide my identity, whether that's what food I'm bringing for lunch or the fact that I was, you know, in an arranged marriage, because that might lead people to make assumptions about me. I thought, oh, this is so interesting. I said, Ruchika, how often? You know, how often do you have to hide your identity? And she said, well, every day.
Wow.
I just, and this is what I mean about white women, where I was like, I never imagined that.
Can you imagine how exhausting that must be? Yeah.
Exhausting, right? So I learned a ton. What I did was I asked these women, just what's your, you know, professional success? What's your Me Too story? By the way, all 13 had multiple, right? Me Too stories. What drives you? You know, why and how do you collaborate with women? When have you experienced that unfair competition or rivalry? And they all shared their stories. And the book is just really a mix of their stories and success stories, right? Like, when did someone, male or female, really step up for me, advocate for me, you know, change the dynamic and change the equation? And then at the end of each chapter, what I really wanted to do with the book was two things. It's optimistic. I'm optimistic that with Me Too, you know, there's no turning back. We have the terminology, we have the platform, we have the shared experience. And so I wanted the book to be optimistic about what's coming. And I wanted it to be practical and actionable, right? I didn't want this doom and gloom book of like all these horrible things that women have been through. It's more about empowering yourself. So every chapter ends with a checklist, and there's the kind of, hey, as a woman, whether you're a younger woman, a mid-career professional, what are some actions you can take?
Oh, I love that. So they're really good. I love that there's things for us to take away.
Just as an individual, you don't have to be a manager. You don't have to own a business. This is just like me as a woman in the workplace. The next checklist is the male allies and advocates checklist. Like, hey guys, you know, if you're on the right side of this, what are things that you can do to advocate, to speak up on behalf of women, to just show up as a good advocate and role model for other guys in your organization? And then the last section is for the business leaders, human resource, diversity and inclusion, and other folks in business to say, you're the people who have the power to affect some, you know, real lasting and scalable change in your organizations. What can you do? And then, because we didn't want that piece to take over the book, I kept it short, but I'm building out an online free resource for those leaders to say, maybe you read about unconscious bias and you want to do more, you want to bring in a training, or you've read about some of these amazing tools that can help eliminate bias from your hiring process. And so we're just going to put all that information out there online for free so that people can access it.
Yeah. I want to make sure now I get this right. It might take me a couple moments because I want to type it into the chat box. So it's Firebrand.
It's female firebrands. And really, this is what I've learned about book titles. All you're going to remember is female firebrands. The subtitle, which is the long descriptive part, it's stories and techniques.
Okay, I think I'll just put female firebrand, and it's available. You said 2020.
You're good. Yeah, it's exactly female firebrands. We just created a landing page. So if you go out to our website, reverbpeople.com, there's a landing page for the book where we
great.
At Female Firebrand on Twitter. And then shortly we'll be launching a Facebook group, which is where everyone can just come together and share their thoughts, stories, experiences, and resources.
Oh, perfect. So that people can kind of keep their eyes out. I'm trying to type, and I unfortunately am getting a lot of typos because
All
I'm
right.
trying to do too many things at once. I think I got that right.
You're fine.
Reverb.com, because I definitely want to get a copy of it as well. Are there going to be any is there going to be any pre-release party or anything that's going to be happening in the Pacific Northwest or via online live streaming?
Absolutely. Yeah, all of the above. So the kind of marketing and promotion will start in September, and that's where we'll have a lot more information. We're going to start providing some excerpts and downloads from the books, including the checklist for people to access. And then I'm still learning about this because I've never written a book, but the first version, before it's ever in retail, there's something that's called an ARC. It's an advanced release copy or something. And
Okay.
once I get my hands on those ARCs, I get to figure out what to do with them. But my goal is the only thing I've ever really learned about business development is to give things away. And, that just works. So my goal is to give away as many books as possible.
Oh, wonderful. Maybe some of us in the chat or myself will get some books. I'd love to read it.
Yeah. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. And then when the Facebook group is around, please join and we will make sure that you get your books, but that you also get invited to some of the launch events we'll be doing.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you. So I want to kind of, in our last 15 minutes or so, kind of touch on sort of as far as the book, and I know you train and you coach lots of senior women. What do you think is there a path of all ages, or maybe we can talk generationally, kind of career path or some things we can do for our careers?
Yeah,
It's,
that's a question.
maybe that's too huge a question, but
It's a huge question, but that's fine. I mean, what I find is that a lot of mid-career women professionals they're ready for a change. Maybe you've been doing that kind of the grind, you're working for someone else, or you're working in something that you're not personally passionate about. It's not fulfilling and rewarding anymore. It might have been earlier, but there's a shift that happens. So it's kind of predictable. Somewhere around 40 or early 40s, we wake up and we're like, I've been working so long and so hard for other people. What am I going to do for myself? Right? This is kind of that midlife wake up call.
And I think it happens for men too. It happens for men and women.
It does. No, that's in fact a colleague from many years ago phoned me the other day, and he said, I'm 40 and it's like a switch flipped and I want to go do something meaningful. Like, help me find it. So it happens for everyone. The biggest thing I would say is, don't ignore that voice. Don't dismiss it. Don't think, well, I'm in a high paying job and I'll never get something equally high paying, doing what I love. It's just not true, right? I always think when we work toward our passion, we do better. We actually fare better, both in terms of physical and mental health, and often from a career standpoint too, because, we have that passion that gives us our drive and our energy. Connect with other women, connect with mentors, consider, talking to a coach. What I love about coaching is it's probably the only person in the world who's 100% objective. They don't have a stake in your life. They're not your spouse. They're not your boss. They're not your best friend. And so all a coach cares about is helping you figure out what's good for you.
Yes.
What I'm finding with younger women, and we interviewed a group of younger women for the book too, who we called the next generation. They were anywhere from some still finishing high school to 30ish, early 30s. And they're recognizing these Me Too moments. They have the language and they have the surroundings to realize this stuff isn't appropriate and I don't have to tolerate it. So what we find is they're naming it more quickly. They're either raising it, rejecting it, either complaining or leaving the workplace. And I want to see more of that. I think really people voting with their feet is the thing that's going to lead to lasting change. It is risky. We don't always have the luxury, right? I don't have the luxury to quit my job tomorrow, but that doesn't mean you can't start looking and trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's fear that keeps us really where we are. And a lot of times those fears never come true.
Yeah.
It's thinking, I've got responsibilities. It's the golden handcuffs is what I call them, and that keeps people in jobs that they really aren't well suited for.
Yeah.
And I hear this over and over again. Well, I'm just doing this job because that's what I've always done, that type of thing. And I think it's that fear.
Yeah, there's a fear, there's inertia, and for whatever reason, even when the status quo is kind of bad, our brains teach us that the status quo is still better than the unknown. And it's not, that's often not true, but we let ourselves believe that. And so, I think really questioning that and knowing the fears, it doesn't mean you won't have the fears, but it's a question of how can I be courageous in the midst of these fears? And I'm the wage earner in my family, so it was scary. I have two kids, and my husband's an artist and a preschool teacher, which is extremely lovely, but doesn't pay the bills, right? So when I went out on my own, my fears were like, I'm not going to make a penny. I'm not going to get clients. This business won't take off. I won't be able to pay for my health insurance. Then it'll be bad, right? So I had those fears, but then what I needed to do for myself was say, is it okay if I don't make a penny for 6 months? Like, do I have enough money put away? Are there some changes we can make in our spending that will give me a little bit more time to explore this? And even to recognize, whatever salary I was at when I left my corporate job, it's not that I need that salary. I need something. I mean, we all mostly need something. We need to make a living. But I didn't need the exact same salary. And then because of some changes in my personal life, let's say, I have more time, so now I can shop and cook more than ordering out or eating out. Like, that saves money. I have the flexibility to work from home, so some of those, parking and commuting costs are going to come down. These things save us money. So I think it's really important to look at the whole equation and do the math.
Absolutely.
Do the math both on the numbers, but also on what are the stories I'm telling myself and which of those are true, and which of those am I making up.
Absolutely. And I think one excellent thing that really has changed with the world of work are different work arrangements. I mean, it used to be you went in the office, you put in your time, whether you were doing work or not. The fact that you were there, the senior leaders felt that you were doing work. Well, now we've got remote options, we have consulting, we have contracting. A lot of people I know in our group do consulting and that type of thing. So really there are a lot more options than doing a corporate job, and that's not for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I really do hope that flex time is overcoming FaceTime, that old arrangement of I have to be at my desk for 9 hours. Like you said, whether I'm productive or not, it's like, no, I'm paying for you, so I just need to see you there in case I need you, right?
Right.
I've been this week, actually, I've been speaking to some women I know who are also independent, and what we've all realized is if you have that flexibility as a consultant or contractor, or if you go out on your own, you actually get to learn when you're at your most productive and work according to your own schedule. So one of our consultants, Ashley, told me the other day, she said, I just realized I'm productive from like 3:30 to 5:30, but I kind of slump in the afternoon. So she was like, now I take a break. I take my dog for a walk. I sit down, have a cup of tea. And then at 3:30, I dive in and I just crank out the work. And I think the problem, with that old tradition is we don't get to be productive when we're at our best. We just have to be productive on someone else's schedule. And that's not to say, I mean, of course we have client meetings. Of course we have deliverables. It's just
Right.
that we get to optimize for our best selves and our best use of time.
And a lot of that is Western culture. It's Western culture. That's not the way people work worldwide. So in the US, it's very, our work ethic is a lot different.
Yeah.
So and that doesn't mean it's right, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad you point that out, because I think we kind of think of these things as the human condition, but you're right. A lot of it we've created in Western society. And this is a whole nother topic, but including the fact that, we have very little family leave or paid maternity, paternity leave. And I used to just think it's so hard to be a working mom. And then I learned it's so hard to be a working mom in the US. It's other cultures do it better, whether it's giving a year off, whether it's countries with joint families where the grandparents, come and watch the kids so mom can go to work and it's less stressful. There are so many different, and better models out there.
Yeah, and I think it's unfortunate too that I do believe women still judge other women for their choices, for not having children, for having children, how they're having their children, whether they're staying home, whether they're not staying home, whether they're involved in school. There's so many different layers to that. And I find that just so unfortunate because we all have different situations and choices, and it's not my place to tell somebody what to do or how to do that. But it happens. It still happens.
Yeah, I mean, that's another example of that internalized sexism, right? Because why should I judge, am I judging guys because they go to work and leave their kids at home? Never. Am I judging the guys whose jobs require them to travel 4 days a week? No, we totally accept that in men. And you're right. We don't need to judge and compete. I learned this. So two lawyers. My parents are in their 70s, both still work, right? Very kind of workaholic upbringing. And so I have a lot of identity around work and achievement. And my daughter asked me the other day, and she said, Mom, when I'm older and I have kids, if I want to stay home with them, is that bad? Like if I'm not working,
Wow.
is that bad? And I thought, oh my gosh, like, I don't ever want to come from a place of judgment. And I just said, honey, the only thing that's bad is if you do something that is not what you personally want to do, right? Like,
Nice.
it's great, work, it's great, do a mix, it's great. I think women need to be allowed and empowered to do whatever the choice they have. And you were talking about this at the very beginning, how, some of these structures at work are still pretty arcane and outdated. And I can tell you, we have a lot of working moms on our consulting team who work half-time because they have young kids.
Mm-hmm.
And those opportunities are still so few and far between that most of those women, they probably wouldn't be working if they couldn't find an arrangement that let them do really good, challenging work on a part-time basis. And companies are losing out big time because many companies still don't have those opportunities.
Absolutely. So it looks like we just have a few minutes left. So I don't see any questions in chat, but I just want to ask if you were to just sort of leave with some parting words of kind of go forth and, what would be some kind of parting words for men and women of how we can kind of move forward and create a change?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. We can all be better advocates and allies for ourselves and others, both men and women. We talk a lot about male advocates, but women can be advocates too. If you see or hear something,
absolutely,
you hear a woman being interrupted, you hear that heap eating where a man in a meeting takes credit for another woman's idea. Whether you're a man or a woman, you can speak up and intervene on that person's behalf. And there is so much research and free toolkits on this stuff. As I started exploring, you actually wouldn't believe, if you just go and look for something like advocacy checklist or unconscious bias checklist, how many resources are available for you as an individual if you just need to learn or get a few tips.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to know we're human. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to, like earlier I admitted, I've done these things myself, but it's being aware and being able to quickly kind of turn your brain in another direction. And it's baby steps because we've been so conditioned, it takes a while to uncondition ourselves. But when we do, we realize, wow, the world is very different than we kind of have been conditioned to believe it is. So I think it's just, be gentle with ourselves as we go forth too.
Right. Yeah. Baby steps are fine. Mistakes are fine. If you make a mistake, you take responsibility and move on. And I would leave again with the optimism. It is a great time for women and girls, right? There's opportunity, there's visibility to all of the stuff that's gone on in the past and that we can start prevent from happening in the future. There's so much dialogue around this. And I would just say, take advantage, insert yourself, be part of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are at 9 o'clock. It did go fast. I thank you so much, Mikaela, for your time today. I know you're a very busy woman. I appreciate you taking time for all of us, and we look forward to your book. And thank you so much again for joining us today. Really appreciated it.
Thanks for having me. It was a fabulous conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, thank you. And
All right.
we have information in the chat. Bye, everybody. Have a very good day. See you next month.